I just want to thank this music team. I'm telling you, I was ready to run around this church. You guys are great. God bless you. You guys are great. God bless you. And the BGMC, oh man. At my age, it's been a long time since I participated in BGMC. But I thank you for this experience of being here today. I can tell you that Scott Bowman is a man of great courage and faith because he asked me to speak. What are you laughing at? I want to introduce some of the important people here. I have my wife, Diane. We've been married 53 years. And before you start doing any calculations, she claims to only be 59 years old. Now, that's not fully a lie because she is 59 years old. It's just 59 plus. Anyways, we've been married 53 years. I also have as a very special guest my nephew, Dr. Colm Acuff, and his two boys, Brendan and Aiden, are here from Savannah visiting us. And I thought it was so wonderful and appropriate, the video thing that we saw, because that is also Dr. Colm's heart as well. He goes to Guatemala and some other places on his own bill. Nobody pays the bill, and he works with people who cannot afford health care. He's an emergency room physician in Savannah and donates his time to the underprivileged, the underserved. So I thank you. Welcome them. So look, we're going to have fun today. We've already had so much fun, and I don't want to be a wet blanket on that. So you're going to have to be light on your feet in your laughter. I need a box of Kleenexes up here. I will not go to a church that doesn't have a box of Kleenexes near the altar, because sooner or later I'm going to find that I'm going to need these to blow my nose. And when I do that, you guys in the back that are running sound, you need to be quick on the math so that we're not magnifying my nose. Lord, I just thank you for this opportunity. Bless these people. Bless this pastor. In Jesus' name. There's a magazine called Preaching Magazine. I don't know exactly what it is other than the title. I've never seen it. Don't know really anything about it. But I stumbled on an internet segment that was from Preaching Magazine. And Preaching Magazine a number of years ago did a survey of many thousands of people, and they wanted to know who was the top 25 preachers in the country. So in honor to have full disclosure, you need to know I did not make the cut. In fact, to really be clear and honest, I didn't get one vote. Now, you should be able to interpolate from that even my wife didn't vote for me. So, I also would like to let you know in full disclosure that I am not a preacher. You know the difference between preachers and laymen. The preacher gets paid for being good, and the layman has to be good for nothing. So I don't have a license to preach. And you know what happens when you drive a car with no license. So I can tell you that I'll be watching through those little windows there and making sure nobody comes in to question my license. I assume the back door to escape is over here somewhere, right? All right. I am the son of a missionary and very proud to be that. Had many experiences in India growing up. Never saw TV till I was 13. Isn't that a blessing? We never had TV. And so my early years were sequestered in a mountain school in the Kodaikanal hills of India. And I have many memories of that. My father was an Assemblies of God pastor and Bible school president, author, and great orator and administrator and everything else that a father should be. And, of course, you would think that I follow in his footsteps. But I had a problem when I was young. I had a very severe stutter. Those of you that have a few gray hairs, you probably know who Mel Tillis was, and I sounded just like that. So how exactly do you serve the Lord in ministry when you have that difficulty? Because people get tired of putting up with your difficulty. And furthermore, as soon as I graduated from high school in Findlay, Ohio, my dad and mom left for Egypt. So from 17, I was on my own, without resources. But I learned some things back then. The difference between resources and a source. A new refrigerator in your house is not a source. That's a resource. A source is something that gets down deep within your bowel and your spirit that you can't fully understand, but it comes out. It can't help coming out. And so even though I stuttered and had some very difficult times, yet my father had really left without owning much. He was a missionary and very sacrificial to everything he did. And so I was on my own from 17. But one thing he did leave me with, and that was an ability to pray and touch God. And so I prayed a lot back then, not knowing what life would be, not knowing how I would end up. So I quickly found a job in a industry, a factory there in Ohio. And it was a factory that made meters, all kinds of measuring devices. And so it was a factory that made measuring devices, and there were 200 women there. That was interesting. But quickly, living a life as best I could, motivated by prayer and a desire to serve God, my eyes only saw one. And she wasn't available. She was dating the quarterback of the Bluffton College football team. Now, the part of my prayer is, Lord, you could make this a little easier on me. Long story short, August 1965, I married the girl, and she's still here. So I learned early on to trust God and to seek His purposes in my life. How to lay hold of the promises of God. And so we were married, and we went to the First Assemblies of God, Calvary Assemblies of God in Toledo, Ohio. Anybody here just been married recently? Somebody less than a year? Anybody like that? I was going to have you stand, so thank goodness I didn't have to do that. But anyways, just think of someone who's just been married, because that's us. We had nothing when we got married. I made $100 a week. And for that, everything came out of that. And that'll get you to pray. So we went to Calvary Assemblies of God, and right away the pastor put me to work teaching with my stutter the young married class in the church. And God was very kind to us, because very quickly we became the largest Sunday school class in the church. In fact, we pushed the pastor out of the sanctuary and we took over the sanctuary. He had to take his senior adult class into our classroom. A very simple thing. Early on, nobody of the young marrieds were coming to church anyways for Sunday school, and that was why the pastor wanted to get something going. So we did this. We said, we're going to take a book of the Bible a week. Now, I know Scott's probably pretty good at preaching on a verse of the Bible a week, but we took a book of the Bible a week. And if you did not read that book during the previous week, you're not allowed to come. And so very quickly, we would start the class saying, now everybody here has read the book, right? If not, you're guilty of not doing what we're agreeing to do. And so very quickly, God began to move in our life, in our young married life. But there is a time of life in which you just get burned out. It's not always funny, and it's not always great. You're just tired. So I was going to night school at the University of Toledo Engineering School. I was teaching this Sunday school class and trying very hard to serve the Lord as best I could. We were involved in the music as well because when I sang, I didn't stutter. So Diane would play the organ and we would lead music from time to time. But I was working 60 hours a week while going to night school and trying to make it, and it was just hard. It was just hard, that's all. And I know everybody knows somebody who's got a lot harder than me, so I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just saying that during those times, you get really serious about your prayer life. And so Don McManus, the pastor, asked us to go to a young marrieds retreat in Big Prairie, Ohio. And I don't know who the man was that spoke. But now it's been 53 years later, I can tell you exactly what he said. Because it has changed my life. Revelation says that they overcome Satan by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And this is my testimony. This is my song. Praising my Savior all the day long. And all the things that He has led us through and showed us and given us. So we're at this young marrieds retreat, and this guy's talking, and he's talking about Galatians 5:16. Now, I'm not going to take time. We don't have time today to go through Galatians 5:16. But if you get into that verse, you know that there's a long list of things we all know we shouldn't be doing. You don't have to be a Christian to know you shouldn't be doing those things. Because God will speak in your inner man and say, this is not right. You know better than this. And then it goes on to give you all the things you should be. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, temperance, and so on and so on. And many other things that are implied from that list that are parallel to that list that become part of the fruit of the Spirit of our life. And so we were challenged to begin the process of walking in the Spirit. And even though I was burned out, tired, and wishing things were easier at that time, I began this great journey. And I lead you in that today. For those of you who have not learned the joy of walking in the Spirit and being led of the Lord, you're missing something. I can't tell you I always understood it. I can't tell you I always was happy about it. But I did learn to begin to trust God. And one of the great people who's long ago gone to be with the Lord was Don Metcalf. And I was so burned out that I was looking for someone to do a Sunday school lesson so that I could get off. And he was an elderly man in his late 80s and walked with a cane, and he couldn't quite stand up straight, and he would bent over like this. And I said, Don, would you've lived a whole life of serving the Lord. Would you come talk to us young marrieds? So he said, sure. So that next week when he was appointed, he comes up and he's like this, and he's standing here. And for some of the young marrieds, it's like, what is this? But Don said, I was taught early in my life to trust God. Yes, sir. He said, I was a teenager during the Dust Bowl years of the Great Recession. And he said, if you saw the movie Grapes of Wrath, you know what life was like. It was very difficult. And we had too many children and not enough food on a farm in Kansas. And at 17, I decided to help my family by leaving. One less mouth to fill. So I hitched a ride on a train as a hobo, jumped on a train, and made my way till the end of the track, and the end of the track was in San Francisco. And back in that time, in that section of San Francisco, the streets were dirt. And he said, as a young 17-year-old, he said, I didn't have anything. Nothing. Every nickel, every dime was gone. I didn't have anything. But I had one thing, and that is my mother taught me how to pray. And I stood on the street corner one day, and I said, God, this is not right. I'm trying to do everything I know to do, and it's just not working out, and I'm so tired. And he looked down, and there in the dirt, somebody must have reached something in their pocket and pulled out pulled out something, and in the process dropped 15 cents. And he sees that 15 cents, and it was all the money he had. Just unbelievable, 15 cents, because the Greeks have an amazing ability to put out an enormous amount of food for a very small amount of price. And he said he knew around the corner and down the street a bit was a Greek restaurant where for 15 cents you could get all you could eat. And he said, oh, my imagination and my thankfulness immediately exploded in praise. And I was, oh, how wonderful. God, you answered my prayer. This is so wonderful. He gripped the 15 cents so he wouldn't lose it, and he began to walk towards the Greek restaurant. And out from an alleyway came a very old man who was also struggling, who was also hungry. And the man said, you ready? The man said, would you give me something to eat? I haven't eaten and I'm so hungry. And Don said, I clasped my fist. This is my 15 cents. And God spoke to him in his heart and said, give him the 15 cents. And Don, within a moment, starts arguing and says, no, this is my 15 cents. I'm sorry about you. I can't feed everybody. This is mine. And God said, give him the 15 cents. And God said, give him the 15 cents. Now, I can't explain what that sounds to you, but if you've experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. You know beyond words when God speaks to you. Sometimes He speaks to you because some things have to change. Sometimes He speaks to you because He wants to challenge you. So often we pray for what we want God to do for us. He's more interested in doing things through us. So when we start walking in the Spirit, as Galatians 5:16 tells us to do, we start walking through the Spirit of God, with the Spirit of God, accomplishing His purposes, not ours. And finally, Don was so well trained. When Scott and others train you here, don't minimize that. When I saw these young BGMC kids up here, how many of them was there? 30, 40? 40? Let me tell you something. Satan wants every single one of them. Every single one of them. And the sin and the debauchery of this world wants every single one of those kids. So there's 40 here that you're a part of keeping from at least that mess. That's worthy of itself. So Don Metcalf has this 15 cents. Remember, he's standing in front of all of us, real young marrieds, and he's shaking, and he can hardly shake, and you wonder whether he's going to make it. And he said, finally, there comes a parting in the road sometimes in your life where you're going to go on the way you were, or you're going to change and go to follow the leading of the Lord. It's what Frost wrote when he said, two paths diverged in a wood, and I chose the one less traveled, and that made all the difference. And that made a difference with Don Metcalf. He carefully gave the man the 15 cents and told him, I remember this story as vivid as I heard it yesterday. He said, sir, I'm hungry too. You're not the only one hungry. But God told me to give you this 15 cents. And if you go down a block and over a block and so on, you'll come into a Greek restaurant where you can get all you can eat. So the man thanked him very much and left. Don never saw him again. Don went back to the exact same spot on the street corner. He said, God, this isn't fair. What do you think you're doing? What do you think you're doing? I'm trying to serve you, and it's not getting any easier. It's getting worse. And he looked up and he was crying and weeping, challenging God to say, make any sense out of this. And across the street walked a fairly well-dressed man. And he looked Don Metcalf up and down and like, what's wrong with you? And he said, kid, can you drive horses? And Don Metcalf says, oh yeah, I can drive horses. I was raised on a farm. I plowed with horses. So I know all about driving with horses. They said, really? He said, do you need a job? And Don said, sir, you don't have any idea how much I need a job. And this was a time in the Dust Bowl where you couldn't find a job. You couldn't buy a job. And the man said, well, if you can drive horses and you need a job, you have a job. You report to such and such a lumber yard, which was close by, tomorrow morning, you have a job. And by the way, I know you, from the look of you, you haven't eaten in a while. Here's a silver dollar on your early wages. You could have 15 cents or you can have a job. Whose voice are you listening to? Thank you, Lord. Well, that's all I needed. That's really all I needed. My weariness as a Sunday school teacher just took off, and I've never forgot it. And often in my life, I've decided it's more important to give 15 cents if that's what God tells me to do than it is to worry about eating or doing other things. So therefore, that's what we're going to talk about for a while today. Now, I want you to stand. I'm going to do something. I want you to stand with me. I want you to put your arms in the air, and I want you to close your eyes. We're going to pray together. Father, there are various needs here. Some people are empty. They're so burned out and so tired. There are other people that are half full, but they're not as full as they need to be. There's other people that are three-quarter full, but they're not overflowing yet. Lord, and then there's people that just need you desperately. We are giving ourselves to you today. We are a vessel, Lord, that we are opening up. That's what our hands mean. Our open hands. We're opening our life. We're opening our hearts to you, Lord, and we're asking you today to fill us with your Holy Spirit. And that means sometimes we're going to do things that don't make any sense because your Spirit is going to begin to indwell us and guide us and lead us in Jesus' name. You can be seated. So, time is getting by. I've got to keep watching the clock here a little bit. Is there not a clock on the back? What do we got? Okay, got a little time. So I was talking to Bill Cagle about this, who is a neighbor of mine, and he said, well, let me tell you my story. And what you want to do is get around people that have these stories. This is where life becomes wonderful. So Bill Cagle was in the service and was in Japan and during the Korean War and was walking the streets on a lot of the guys had a weekend off. A lot of guys were doing what guys do in foreign cities when nobody's watching. But Bill Cagle was a young man who had been taught by his parents to serve God and to trust God. And so he was walking alone. And there was a commotion down an alleyway in Tokyo. And so Bill, don't know what it is, so he wanders over to the alley, and he sees these people, and these people are looking at something, and he makes his way. He was a big guy. Makes his way in, and he sees this guy sitting on the ground, and he's doused himself with gasoline, and he's got a lighter, and he's about to set himself on fire and kill himself, and the people are actually egging him on. And he was just sitting there, and Bill Cagle, the Spirit of God rose up within him, and he yelled and says, "Stop, what are you doing?" And the man, and not thinking that he is in Japan, and this man wouldn't even know what he's talking about. This man wouldn't know English. But just the Spirit of God rose up and said, "Stop! What do you think you're doing?" And the man said, "Why should I stop?" And Bill Cagle says, "Because you are not your own. You've been bought with a price. And the price has been paid. What are you doing?" And suddenly it struck Bill Cagle. This guy's talking in English. Turns out he's an English professor in Tokyo. And life had been unkind, and life had been very difficult, and everything was lost, and everything was hopeless. And all he could do was to set himself on fire and commit suicide, which happens more than you need to know in Japan. It's a terrible situation there in many ways. So Bill Cagle said, "You've been bought with a price." And the English professor said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, get your clothes off. Let's get you cleaned up. I'm going to sit and talk to you." So Bill sat the rest of the night and talked with him all night long. You know where that man is today? He's pastoring a church of 5,000 people in Tokyo. Do you want 15 cents in a meal, or do you want a job? Do you want a night in the hot spots and watching things we shouldn't be watching? Or do you want a story of your life? That's what's at stake. That's what's at stake between the early things of Galatians 5:16 is the things we shouldn't be doing, and the rest of the things that we should be doing that you know about, that is led by the Spirit of God. But so often it's very difficult for us to see at the moment what God's doing. So Luke 22 is a marvelous, marvelous chapter because it's sandwiched between two amazing other chapters. In the 21st chapter, it starts out with the story of the widow giving a mite. She didn't have nothing; she gave it all. That's walking in the Spirit. And trusting God. And 2,000 years later, we know her story. Do you want to keep your mite, or do you want a story? That's sometimes what's at stake. The story of your life. The story of God working in you and through you. And then Jesus in that 21st chapter lays out a lot of things about the end of times and a lot of instruction of how we should be doing and thinking. And the 23rd chapter is where Jesus has been condemned and before Pilate, and he's hauled off and crucified. So those are monumental columns of our faith. The words about the end times and the end of his life at Calvary. Sandwiched in there is the 22nd chapter. And the 22nd chapter has an interesting story to it. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read a lot for you. But it's a simple story. Jesus tells the disciples, go and prepare the Passover. Peter and John, I guess. And they say, why do you what? Where are we supposed to do this? Get used to, if you're serving God and walking in the Spirit, get used to Him asking you to do things you haven't got a clue. You haven't got a clue what it's going to be. So they're saying, where should we prepare the Passover? Wonderful story. Jesus says, you go into such and such a place, and you're going to find a man walking with a pitcher of water. Talk to that man that the master has need to fulfill the Passover feast, and he will show you an upper room that's already prepared. Now, can't you think about the absurdity of that instruction? Carrying water was not man's job. Women met at the well and probably gossiped or whatever, told the local stories, and men were not really appropriate there. So here's a man out of character carrying a pitcher of water. That's women's work. Except when you're carrying the water of life. And so, because that's available to anybody. That's not gender specific. So Jesus says, just find a man who is walking carrying a pitcher. And you can just have, Peter or John say, get that. And when you talk to that man, you'll find he's already prepared a place. So, there are times when, in the uncertainty of what's going on, you're right in the middle. Do you ever go to a movie, you haven't got a clue how this is going to end? In the uncertainty of what's going on, as you mature in your faith and your confidence and your trust in God, you realize that this isn't kind, this isn't easy, this isn't natural, this isn't where my natural mind would go. The Bible says the natural mind discerns not the things of God. This isn't where my natural mind would think was reasonable. But I've learned to trust in Jesus, and I've learned to not question it and to move on by faith. And I have a story in my life that has been with me a very long time. Not too far after our being appointed to the to be a general manager in North Carolina of a very large plant. I found that, when you're young and you're paying college bills and you're doing things, you don't have everything you need. And I certainly didn't have a winter suit. And I was frequently now flying between North Carolina and Detroit. And I'd go up there during the winter and I looked ridiculous because all I had was North Carolina summer clothes. And so there was a program there, or a conference there, called Power for the 90s. Ed Cole was there and a lot of the luminaries of the Christian church were there. And I decided, okay, I'm not going out with the guys tonight. We're not going to have dinner. I'm going to skip dinner. I'm going to go to the Power for the 90s. And so as I made my way over to the Civic Center, right there in front of the Civic Center, this actually was in Toledo, Ohio, although I was more going to Detroit at the time. But right across the street was the finest men's store in all of Toledo, called Christian St. John's. And so I went in there, just recognizing I didn't have a decent suit and recognizing that God was moving me into circles where everyone else in the circle seemed to have a great suit except me. And I went in there kind of longing and wishing I could get a really nice suit. Well, wouldn't you know it, he had a Palm Beach. I don't know if that's still a big deal, but when I was young, that was kind of like a Ralph Lauren kind of brand. And he had a blue suit that was just unbelievably beautiful. It was worsted wool and silk lined, can you imagine? Silk lined, and I put it on and it just fit me perfect. There wasn't anything needed to be just fixed except the cuffs. And I said, how much is this? And he looks at it, he says, about $300. $300? I didn't have $300. All I had was plastic. And I immediately felt, this is not right. This is not right. There's something wrong with this. I need to confer with my wife before I do that. And so I said, well, put it back on the rack. And I'm going over to this conference. And if I get in my spirit the feeling that this is what I should do, I'll come back and buy it after I leave the conference. But if not, if I don't come back tonight, then put it on the rack and sell it to somebody else. So I thought that was interesting. I just kind of put that thought in my back pocket. Hey, if I was to pick out a perfect suit, that would be it. So I went over to the conference and I sat down towards the back a little late because I was fooling around with suits instead of doing what I was supposed to be doing. And I sat down, and lo and behold, here comes a great big guy, a giant of a guy. Remember how Hoss is on Bonanza? That size. So I'm sitting, the chairs were kind of close like this. So I'm sitting there, and here comes Hoss, and sits down beside me, and taking kind of his chair and some of my chair. Like, hey, this is my space. So anyways, we began to worship like you just did, and kind of figure out what's going on with this conference. And so I'm watching this guy beside me, and he's really clean, and he's well pressed. But I noticed the suit doesn't fit anymore. It's kind of like this number. He can't get it closed. And I noticed on his cuffs that the shirt was really worn to where the inner layer of the cuff was sticking out. The outer layer was worn. It was well cleaned and pressed and all. He had dignity about him. And I then happened to notice he had this tie, which was awful, just awful. Probably was free at some center. And it had like gravy drips on it. And sure enough, he crosses his leg, and there's a big hole in his shoe, and it's winter. And the Spirit of God said, I want you to buy him a suit. And I remembered Don Metcalf and his 15 cents. And I remembered Bill Cagle. And I was able to say, God, this is really what it's like to walk in the Spirit. I have needs too. So at the break, I fell in love with the guy without ever even meeting him. We would kind of laugh the same. We would kind of respond the same. When it was time to put up our hands, he was putting up his hands, and kind of I had to move over, man. You know, he'd taken the whole place. I loved him because God knew who he was and where he was, and God was going to use me to bless him. So I said to him, I said, "Sir, could I ask you, could you use a new suit?" I don't know whether you've ever seen Hoss on Bonanza cry, but immediately tears formed in his eyes. And tears began to drip down on those gravy drips. And he said, "Yeah, I guess you can tell I really need a new suit." I said, "Well, who are you?" He said, "Well, I'm a young pastor. I really feel God's call upon my life. It's very hard. We're in a coal mining town in Indiana, and I just don't know what to do. I'm doing everything I know to do, and I came to this conference to see if there's something I could learn." I said, "Well, God told me to buy you a suit. Let's go next door." So we go over to Christian St. John's, which had my idea was I'm going to buy someone a suit. I'd like it to be somewhere along like Sears or Penny's or something. Not Christian St. John's, because he didn't have no Sears and Penny's suits. So I take him over there, didn't tell him who I was, and or my name or anything, and I watched as this very happy store owner started filling out his needs for clothes. And of course, he had a wonderful suit available in his size, big size. Sears and Penny's wouldn't have that, but Christian St. John's did, and he looked just like $1 million. But you got this old shirt that's all frayed, and you got the gravy drip tie, and you got the shoes with the holes. And so I said to the guy, I said, I'd like you to, on the side, not in front of this pastor, I said, I'd like you to get him a full outfit. Get him a couple shirts, get him a couple ties. And this was the kind of men's store that had a full-time seamstress in the back. And so I said, while you're adjusting his cuffs and all that, delay and work this up, and I'm going to buy it. Now, what happened, this was in the evening now, and the store owner is starting to smell something. He said, "Something wrong with this. Do you know this man?" I said, "No, never saw him before in my life." "Well, what are you doing buying him a suit?" I said, "God told me to buy him a suit, and I'm going to do it." And the man said, "Really?" Now, you have to understand, this was not a cheap deal. If you go to buy Scott a pair of new shoes, he's likely to do what Hoss did on Bonanza, and that is he picked out the alligator jobs that were so fresh they were still snapping. And they were not cheap. I didn't question where's the nearest Sears. I had learned by this time to walk in the Spirit. I didn't question, is there some other cheaper option? God told me to buy him a suit. There's the store. That's where you walked in. Now just go do it. So I said to the proprietor, I said, work it up quickly. Here's my plastic. Put it on the plastic. And I want to leave here. And I'm ordering you not to tell him who I am or give me any information. He said, "Why is that?" I said, "Because it doesn't matter who I am. It only matters that God told me to do this. That's all that matters to me." So gradually this guy kind of warmed up, thinking I'm not a crook. And so he runs the numbers, and he says, this is a lot of money. Would you mind if I helped you buy this guy a suit? I said, "No, I wouldn't mind a bit." That's definitely God. That's definitely God. So $700 worth of clothes, and he cut the price to $350. Now, because he was a Jewish store owner, he probably still made a little money at least. But I was happy as a lark. I could afford the $350 maybe. So I said, put it on the charge card. He says, "Now what about your suit that you wanted?" I said, I can't afford it. He said, I said, I can't afford what I'm even doing. I didn't buy the suit I wanted because I couldn't afford it. Hey, but he said, but you're buying this guy a suit. I said, yeah. I said, just please listen to me. Ring it up. Thank you for your help, but put it on the plastic. I got to get out of here. So he rang it up, $350, and off I left. I never saw Hoss again in my life. And I thought this story was about a blue suit. I thought this story was, about me. It had nothing to do with any of that, really. If you look at it in the context of the important things of life, it had a whole different experience and meaning. And you go through these kinds of things enough times, and all of a sudden, you get hungry for walking in the Spirit. You get hungry to bless other people. These couples that are helping these people who can't afford health care. Calm, who goes to Guatemala to help people who can't afford what he has to offer. So I thought this was about a suit, and I thought the end of the story is just like you right now. Maybe some of you are wishing because the Baptists are already filling in the restaurants. But for right now, the restaurant will have to wait. So what happened is I had a terrible boss. His name was Harold Knutson. He was a union president. He had shut down several Schmidt meat packing operations due to strikes, and he was very, very difficult. But he had joined our company as a manufacturing vice president, switched from the union side to the management side, and he brought a lot of the Gestapo kind of things that were going on at that time. Things have thankfully improved in those areas, but at that time it was very difficult. And he was a tough guy, and very tough on me. He felt all this business about being a Christian and stuff is really being a wimp. A bunch of Barney Fifes trusting God. What's that all about? So he was very hard on me. Remember, I thought this story was about a suit. So one time Harold came down a few months later, and he was in my office giving me heck about certain things in our business, rightfully so, probably. And in the front door of my office comes a large box. And he says, "What is that?" I said, "I have no idea." He says, "Well," he somehow later told me he had gotten in his mind that I was accepting either a award or a gift from a supplier or something. And we had signed ethics agreements where we were not allowed to accept anything from a supplier or customer more than a $25 meal somewhere. So no gifts allowed is bottom line. And he felt this was a gift that I was getting from somebody somewhere. So he says, "Well, open the box." I says, "Okay." So I got up and opened the box, removed the tissue paper, and here's a note. The note was from Christian St. John's, and he says, "What you did for Hoss on Bonanza has haunted me, and I can't get away from it. Here's your blue suit on me." Now, that's a wonderful story, but it's not the story. What I told you is a measure of success. One guy got a whole set of clothes. I got my suit. It only cost me $350. That's success. Walking in the Spirit is not about success. Walking in the Spirit is about significance. And anytime I've got a choice between 15 cents and finding a job with a silver dollar in my hand, I'll tell you which one I'm going to choose. And that's a learned kind of thing as you experience God in your life. So Harold says, "Open the box." So I opened the box, and here's the card from Christian St. John's. He says, "You're haunting me. I cannot get away what you did for that guy. Here's your suit on me." So I'm already sudden tearing up. And Harold says, "What's going on?" And I said, "Harold, I'll tell you the story, but you're going to have to be quiet and listen." Harold was not a patient man. So I told him the story just as I told you, and I passed him the card. And I said, this is from Christian St. John, and here's my suit. And I saw my boss cry. I saw my boss cry. I didn't have 15 cents in the meal. I had a job. I saw him cry, and he said, my God, Carl, I wish I was more like you. And that formed then a 30-year relationship. He just died last November. I was the one asked to do the keynote speaking at his funeral, to give the eulogy and to talk about our experiences with him. A 30-year relationship that blessed me financially more than I can ever describe to you. It's not about suits. It's about what God's doing in your life. It's not about success. It's not about titles. It's not about owning stuff. Believe me, I can tell you that. I can tell you that personally. It's not about that. It's about walking in the Spirit and allowing God to lead you in your life. So, Harold and I formed a lifelong relationship that blessed me greatly, and it's 12 o'clock. So let's bring this to a close. Walking in the Spirit is to see God in everything you do. Every thought you think, every word you say. And can anybody live that perfectly? Oh, my goodness, no, definitely not me. But we can try. And we commit, Lord, this is what I want to do. I want to walk in the Spirit. This is how I want to live life. One last story. In 1960, a young man by the name of Bill McChesney felt the call of God to be a missionary to Africa. And he sacrificed giving himself into what would have been a high education and large amounts of financial wealth from his family, and instead went out to Africa and fulfilled a call upon his life in Zaire. Before he left, he wrote a poem, and it goes like this. It's the difference between success and significance. Here's what he wrote. I want my breakfast served at 8 with ham and eggs upon the plate. A well-broiled steak, I'll eat at 1 and dine again when day is done. I want an ultra-modern home and in each room a telephone, soft carpets too upon the floors and cozy drapes to grace the doors, and then I'll get a color TV. Of course, I'll be careful what I see, but I want my wardrobe too to be of neatest, finest quality with latest style, suit and vest. Why shouldn't Christians have the best? But then one day, in prayer, the Master I can hear, in no uncertain voice so clear, but I bid you come and follow me. The lonely man of Galilee, birds of air in trees build nests, foxes in their holes find rest, but I will guarantee you no certain bed, no place had I to lay my head. In prayer I hung my head and cried, how could I spurn the crucified? Could I forget the way he went, the sleepless nights in prayer he spent? Alone he fasted, on he went, and did not stop till veil he rent. A man of sorrows and of grief, the prophet said. Smitten of God, his blood ran red. And so if he be God and died for me, no greater sacrifice could be for me, a mortal man, to make. I'll do it all for Jesus' sake. Yes, I will walk the path he trod. No other way will please my God. So henceforth, this my choice shall be. My choice for all eternity. He chose between a meal and 15 cents, and he chose between his eternity. He's there working with many other missionaries in Zaire, later in Zaire, when there was a tremendous uprising. And unfortunately, in the process of that uprising, he was killed. A wasted life? No. I'll tell you what's a wasted life. Holding on to 15 cents. Thinking because you got a fancy suit that you're pretty successful. That's what's a wasted life. But finding the will of God and doing the will of God and filling your life full of the leadership of the Holy Spirit, that's significance. I have a word from the Lord for you today. It's Jeremiah 13:3. It says, call unto me and I will answer, and I will show you great and mighty things you know not of. God, in everything we do, whether it's the widow's mite we started with, or whether it's being president of a company, The great call for us today is to begin to walk in the Spirit. If you haven't. If you have, we thank God for it. Don't give up. Best is yet to come. Every head bowed, every eye closed.